Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah, daf Gimel. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the very top of our daf. So what we saw at the end of the previous daf was that there was a machlokah between Rish Lakish and Rav Yishmael bar Rav Shmuel in the name of Abaye about what this language of kinui is. So we said that it either creates jealousy between her and other people and kind of friction, or it creates friction between her and her husband. Either which way, this doesn't sound like a very positive thing. To which the Gemara says, top of our daf, Alma kasavre de'asur lekanot. Therefore, it seems to say, they seem to hold that it's forbidden to do this because this is not a good thing. It's not a good thing to start suspecting your wife and having either she distanced herself from other people and everybody says, what's with this woman? Or, gets all upset at her. Or create a stress between the relationship, strain on their relationship. It sounds like this is a bad thing. But there are two different approaches. And this, by the way, sounds very reminiscent of the beginning of Nazir and the beginning of Nidarim, thus linking these three Masechtot in another way. Because all of them seem to be talking about things that by some people are viewed as a positive thing and some people as a negative thing. And you see already in the beginning of this Masechet that not everybody thinks that it's a good thing for the husband to be suspecting his wife and bringing this out in public and bringing her to the temple and making her drink the waters. They're not really approving of this method. However, there are those who say mutar lekanot, it's permitted. Ma'u lashon kinui. So according to them, how do they understand kinui? Kinui is a positive thing. Rav Nachmani bar Yitzchak ein kinui ela lashon hatra'a. Kinui is a warning. And they quote a pasuk in Yoel where God was warning the people of a locust infestation that was about to come. Vayikaneh Hashem la'artzo. And there it's understood as God announced this and kind of spread the word, warned them about what was going to be in order to get them to tshuva, to repent. So likewise here also, this is used as a warning. He warned her. And that's a positive thing, like God would use it. Tanya, another braita, and we'll get back to this idea about it being where this comes from. We're going to actually, in fact, see that it's somewhat of a three-way debate, whether it's not looked on as a good thing, or it's permitted, or it's actually obligatory for him to do the kinui. And then we'll talk about how the Yerushalmi views this a little bit differently than here. Tanya, or at least expands on it in a way that's not expanded upon here. Tanya, Haya Rabbi Meir Omer, Adam over avera b'seter, v'Kadosh Baruch Hu machriz alav b'giloi, going with this thing about him announcing it, and it sounds like announcing it publicly the same way God did. Also here, we say, we're going to learn certain things about sinning in general from the Sotah. And if you look at, we go with this approach that the Sotah is not, that doing kinui is not a good thing. We don't really want this to happen. And the fact that we really don't see Sotot happening in actuality, it's not even clear whether the ceremony was ever performed. So you see here that we're going to learn a lot of, it's a model for other cases to understand about sinning and about adultery and how serious it is. And we're going to learn concepts from here, even if we don't actually practice this. So here's one thing we're going to learn from here. Adam over avera b'seter. You do something secretly, which obviously one of the main things about Sotah is it's always talked about, it's done secretly. Kadosh Baruch Hu machriz alav b'galoi, and God makes it come out. Everyone sees it. How do we know this? Shenema ba'abar alav ruach kinah, because now literally this translates as a wind of jealousy went over the husband, and then he does the kinui, right? He accuses her. But here they say, Ein avira ela lashon hachraza. The word la'avor comes from the root that's used in other places as announcing. And that's what it means. It gets announced, this whole thing, meaning God puts himself into the husband to make sure he gets up and announces this and makes this public. Shene'amar v'yitzav Moshe v'yaviru kol b'machaneh. This is Moshe commands, and they're going to make a big announcement in the Machaneh, right? This was about when the people were bringing the money to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Mishkan, to build it, and then there was enough, and Moshe basically makes this big announcement. It's enough. Don't bring any more. Rish Lakish Amar. So what do we learn from this? We learn, don't think you can hide from God. Don't think you could do something secretly and God doesn't know you did it, right? Maybe humans don't know you do something secretly, but God knows, and God will make it come out. Another thing, another thing we learn from the Sotah is that people don't sin unless some foolish thought comes into their head, which could be understood in many different ways. The way I understand it is that if you keep with your your brain working properly and your seichel and you keep your wits about you, you won't sin. It's only when you start leaving that intelligence and using your mind for, kind of doing foolish things that you end up sinning. How do we learn this from the Sotah? Shenema, ish ki tiste ishto. Now, could say, a man, way it's introduced, first of all, it's interesting, it says ish, get to the drashot on that, but ish, ki tiste ishto, could say, first of all, tiste is with a samach, not a sin, that's number one. Number two, tiste is to go wayward. Ki tate ishto would also be if she veers off the path. Okay, so you could be using your intelligence, but veer off the path. The fact that it says tiste ishto is a reference to tishke ishto, milashon shtut, of foolishness. So there you have it, that it's teaching you that if one acts foolishly, and then that will kind of take you into a path of sin. When you lose, this is like the theme of all of Mishle. Okay, it's always against foolishness and folly and all of that. Now we go back to what we saw on the previous page about Eid Echad being believed that the woman is impure. Right? If the woman went into a room alone, see two, right? First the husband suspects her, he warns her, two witnesses, then she goes into a room with two witnesses. We don't know what happened in the room, but one witness comes and says, I saw that something happened and they had relations in the room. So now, at this point, what happens to her? She has to get divorced. She's forbidden to her husband and to the person who she slept with. That's the classic for a woman who does adultery. And she loses her ketubah money. Now, anything else? And she can't drink the Sotah waters. She can't ever prove her innocence, even though there's only one witness against her. Normally, we accept two witnesses. The only thing that doesn't happen as a result of this one witness is we don't kill her and him. Normally, adulterers get killed. We can't do that because we don't have two witnesses. But it is enough for everything else. So now they say, why? Why did the house of Rabbi Yishmael, they darshan? Why is that? Because there's some kind of, there's feet on the ground, there's proof on the ground. He warned her, and she anyway went into a room alone with this man. What, is she an idiot? Right? Obviously, she wanted to do something, otherwise she wouldn't go in a room alone with him. The fact that she went in a room alone with him after the husband had already warned her, don't go into a room alone with this man, obviously it means probably something happened, and therefore is enough. Okay, so once we have one witness, it's enough to already say it must be true, not just one witness in a vacuum. Amalei Rav Papa Labai. Papa says to Abai, how can you possibly say this? Because what? Where did we learn the pasuk of Eid Echad? It said, right, she's nistira ve'eid ein ba, right? She goes into the room and then there's no witness. Meaning if there was one witness, it would be okay. That was all the drashot from yesterday. That pasuk, kinui batar stira v'tumah diktiva. The pasuk about kinui, which we're trying to say happened first, and since there's raglayim that there was kinui already, and then there's one witness, that should be enough. After there's stira also. Pasuk about kinui comes after that pasuk, and after stira and tumah diktiva. So it doesn't make any sense in terms of the order. Amarle va'aval. Now, what again? Where's the kinui? Va'aval aleav ruach shtut. Right. In other words, what happened? She was in the room with him, right? And then it says, and then he did kinui. Now that doesn't make any sense. He did kinui after. So how do they explain it? Ukvar aval. When it says va'avar aleav ruach tumah ruach kinah, said he had a ruach kinah, a thought, right? This wind of, which we're going to talk about what that is soon. This wind of jealousy struck him. And he, right, and then he did the kinui. That's obviously, it means that happened before this pasuk. Otherwise, the order makes no sense in any case. And for sure, for this drasha, it makes no sense. So we're going to say that already happened. To which the Gemara says, wait, you're going to say the word va'avar means past tense? I'm going to show you where avar means future tense. This is in Reuven and Gad when they don't want to go into the land. And Moshe tells them, you're going to have to go first. And it says va'aval. It's obviously talking about the future. And hachinami hatan midichtiv, and there clearly it's talking about the future because it says, and the land will be conquered, and then you can go back. Which obviously means in the future they haven't conquered the land yet. It's clear. Mashma de lahaba. From there it sounds like avar means future. Alahacha. So they say, no, here, isa kadatach kediktivi va'avar batar tuma v'stira kinoi lamali. But they say there's no way to translate this about future, because if it was future, then there would be no meaning, right? After Tuma and Stira, there's kinui. There's no point for kinui after that. It's already been determined she was. It doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the order has to be, even though the order's flipped, it means when it says aval and he does kinui, it's obviously referring to something that happened previously, even though avar in other places, right? This is basically means it's all learned out from the context and it's clear. So what have we done so far? We showed that there's this machloket. Is it forbidden lekanot? Is it forbidden for the man to do it, or is it a good thing for the man to do it? Then we saw again about things we learn about sinning from the Sotah. Number one, if you do something secretly, don't think it won't be publicized. Number two, you're only going to do it if some ruach shtut comes into you. It's basically from not thinking clearly that causes you to sin. And then we wanted to know why is the Eid Echad believed? And that's because there's raglayim l'davar, because there's already been things, and then how could the kinui have been before? See, it appears in the pasuk after, it must have happened first, and because he warned her, and she went anyway into the room, and we have witnesses for all of that, 2 witnesses. Therefore, when one witness comes and says, it wasn't in a vacuum, therefore we believe it. Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael. Now we have another line about sinning. Ein adam mekaneh li'ishto. Now we're going to talk about, not sinning, about the man. When he decides to do kinui, what possesses him to do this, right? Think about it. A man to start accusing his wife in public of doing this would be crazy, right? First of all, first thing to do is talk to your wife, start communicating, try to figure out what happened, try to be honest, have an honest discussion, communicate. So, right, communication is going to be a big theme of this Masechet. So, number two, it's a huge embarrassment if he starts doing this in public, right? Another thing, people are going to start thinking maybe the kids from their marriage are not their own kids. Maybe she's been cheating on him all these years. And it's going to cause fighting between them. If he starts suspecting her, right, what kind of relationship is that to live in? Where she thinks she's constantly nervous that he's suspecting her, and they're going to be fighting all the time. It's not pleasant. So what would possess a man to do this, as opposed to real good communication with his wife? Okay, comes Rabbi Yishmael and he says some sort of other ruach came into him, and this has proof in the pasuk. Notice it doesn't just say a man is kinei ishto; it says some ruach kin'ah came into him. My ruach, what kind of ruach is this? Ruach literally means a wind, but it's like a spirit here. A spirit comes into him. Rabbanan amrei ruach tum'ah. Rav Ashi amar ruach tahara. Very interesting debate. Is it a good spirit or a bad spirit? This sounds very much like asur lekanot or mutar lekanot, right? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Umistaber kamanda amar ruach tahara. Now, despite the fact that what the Gemara is going to side on the side of thinking this is a good spirit, but still there was this debate about it, right? And it's clear that there's things pulling in different directions. Are we happy this man's doing it, or are we not happy? So now the Gemara, classic Gemara, where nothing's clear really. Everything is open to options. So now they say, Mistaba command amar ruach ta'ava. Why is it more likely that it was a ruach ta'ava? Detanya, it was a pure, a good ruach that caused him to start suspecting her or being jealous and saying something about it and warning her. Why? Because Detanya, v'kinet, there's a braita that says, kinet ishto reshut, divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, it's permissible for him to do it. Rabbi Akiva omer chova, it's obligatory. So now what does that have to do with this? Well, Yamart bishlama ruach tahara shapir. Both of them seem to indicate it's something positive. And that would only go if it was a ruach tahara, pure spirit that got into it. Eliyamar ruach tum'ah, reshuta chova liluye inish ruach tum'ah benafshe. Doesn't make sense that reshuta chova wouldn't, right? A bad spirit, what, you're going to have a bad spirit's going to cause you to do something that's permissible or obligatory? No, of course not. It would have to be a good spirit. So even though we have this machloket as a reshut or chova, both of them fit in with this ruach tahara. So now we're going to go more into this gufa. Gufa is going in more in depth into this machloket. And not just to the two of them argue, but remember, we also saw maybe it's not a good thing at all, right? Which isn't listed here. The Yerushalmi actually connects this debate to this debate that happens in Gittin about divorce. By divorce, it says, Kim tzaba ervat davar. We're going to quote this pasuk later in today's daf. When you find some erva in your wife, and you decide to divorce her. So there's machlokes, how seriously do we take this? Does it mean the husband can only divorce his wife if he has proof that she's been with another man. Or, that's Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel says, no, even if she burns your food, you can divorce her. So, very interesting machloket. What does that have to do with this? Well, comes the Yerushalmi and connects it and says, listen, if you say, like Beit Shammai, that you can only divorce her if you have proof that she's been with someone. Now, in this case, the husband's suspicious of his wife. He can't divorce her. Well, if he can't divorce her, and maybe she really was with someone, the only option is to do kinui, and that would make it a chovah, obligatory. Because you can't be with your wife if she's been with someone else, so you have to go through a process to figure out. According to Beit Hillel, he can divorce her if he wants. So maybe better off, instead of airing this all out in public, divorce your wife and move on. You think she's cheated on you, so move on. And therefore, that would be more toward the side of either reshut, right, where it's an option. You can either divorce her if you want, or you can decide to go ahead with the Sotah process, but you don't have to go ahead with it. Or even possibly, you could say it's forbidden, because just divorce her and don't do this whole thing. Gemara, the Tosfot here, this, by the way, quoted in Tosfot Rosh, reconnects this based on the Yerushalmi. Anyway, the Tosfot said something very interesting, which I like to read, because Tosfot likes to talk a lot about the order of Masechta, which I find always interests me as well, and I think a lot of you. So Tosfot says at the bottom, right, some commentaries just don't deal with it. So Tosfot tries to prove from here. He says, he says, it's confusing according, or it's I could raise a question on the Yerushalmi. Why? Because if the Sotah thing is all dependent on divorce, then, right, he says, since the whole thing about whether you can do kinui or not is all dependent on divorce, then he says you should have had Sotah after Gitin. And then the order should have been, based on yesterday's sugya, it should have been, right, go Gitin, then it says go Sotah, Nazir, because of the smichut of those two. Right? Once you see a Sotah, you become a Nazir. It actually makes more sense to do it that way. And then Nidarim, right? And also it says like the order in the Parshiyot. First there's Sotah, then there's Nazir. And then after Nidarim, Ketubot. And it would have been a totally different order. Anyway, that's just interesting. Now let's get back to our Gemara. The Gemara is now going to quote two other debates between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, particularly about this issue. About it's going to be on different topics, different mitzvot. Are they reshut or are they obligatory? Is it just that it's permitted to do, or is it an obligation? Then the Gemara is going to get off on how does each one prove their point? From where? From where in the Pesukim does Rabbi Yishmael get it? And what does Rabbi Akiva say to that? And then the ping pong back and forth. So la itama, this is a pasuk we talked about in Nazir. Kohen can be impure to his sister. Rishut, his sister is a virgin. It's permissible. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva says he has to. Lo'olam behem ta'avodu. This is that you're allowed to have Canaanite slaves, and once you have them, you're not supposed to free them. Well, rishut, Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says you can keep them forever, but you don't have to keep them forever. Rabbi Akiva, you have to keep them forever. He says it's an obligation. Maybe Rav Papa said to Abaye, maybe Rav Sharshia said to Rava, we're not sure who, but they said the following. Wait a minute. Lema, you're trying to say Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, B'chol Torah Kula Hachi Plige? They're arguing these two cases. What, they argue this the whole Torah? Tomorrow Amar Rishut, tomorrow Amar Chova, and then Rabbi Yishmael thinks all these things are just optional, and Rabbi Akiva views them as obligatory. And not only that, Tosfot raises a question. What are you trying to say? That also, that there's 613 mitzvot. Rabbi Yishmael doesn't count them all, like he drops these off the list. Amalei, hacha b'krai, please. So the answer is, they're actually having a debate just in these psukim. Okay, it's really a debate about how to read these psukim and how to darshan. And it's really just localized to these three issues. V'kinei tishto reshut, divrei Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva omer chova. So now we're going to go one by one. My time at the Rabbi Yishmael, why does he say it's optional? Savarlaki Haitan. He holds like the following time. The Tanya, as it says in the braita, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he said, Torah says, don't hate your brother in your heart. Now, a man who's suspicious of his wife cheating on him must be hating her and causing hatred between the two. So maybe this is included. You might have thought it's forbidden to accuse your wife of this and start, going through this process. So because it says that you can do it, that comes to teach you it's permitted. Okay, so basically, base assumption is it's forbidden. Pasuk comes to teach you, well, it's not forbidden, you can do it. But where do we get to chovah, according to Rabbi Akiva then? Rabbi Akiva, kinui, he says, actually, that pasuk says kinui twice. What does the pasuk say? It says, This spirit passes over him. And option number one is he is threatening her, right? He's jealous of her. And she actually really was impure. She did something with him. Or he suspected her and she wasn't impure. And she hadn't slept with anyone. So now comes Rabbi Akiva and he says, why does it say it twice? It says it twice to tell you the second time. The first time is to say it's permitted. Second time is to tell you, well, now that you got to permitted, the second time would be to say it's obligatory. And that's how he gets it. So obviously we're going to have to ping pong back to Rabbi Yishmael. What does he do with the second one? Rabbi Yishmael, it wanted to give you both options. So each time it said he's suspicious of her and he's jealous of her and he accuses her. And she was guilty or she wasn't guilty, but each time it just repeats it, not for any real reason, and that's yes, for a reason, not because it's unnecessary. It was to give both sides. And in fact, this goes with what Rabbi Yishmael says. And we're going to see this with all three cases. As he said, Rabbi Yishmael, whenever something's repeated, it's not stam repeated, it's repeated to talk about the new thing. This was giving option number two, that she really had slept with someone. And therefore it said, the second one was she hadn't slept with someone, and therefore it repeated it. It had a purpose. So it's not free to darshan. Second issue, Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva, and here we'll make a reference soon to a sugya we learned in Nazir not too long ago. My time at the Rabbi Yishmael, why does he say it's reshut? Again, it's going to be the same idea. Kohanim are commanded not to become impure to anybody. So you had to know you can be impure to your sister. Rabbi Akiva says, what are you talking about? It already says to anyone who's close to you. So it's unnecessary. What does that come to do? To teach you it's an obligation. So again, we start with, right, you assume it's forbidden, therefore comes to teach you can be, which means it's just optional. Rabbi Akiva says, what do you mean? We already learned it's optional from Ki'im l'sheiro. La yitama comes to say it's actually obligatory. Rabbi Yishmael, la mitama. What does he do with la yitama then? It's unnecessary. Rabbi Akiva just proved it was unnecessary. He says, and this is for something we learned in Nazir, la mitama ve'em mitameh le'evareha. You can come impure to your sister and your relatives, but you can't become impure to their their bones. They die, okay? Or even if they're alive. To any parts of their body. Remember, the body has to be complete. We have this whole drasha. If the body's missing parts, you can't become impure. So that we learn from la yitama. So la yitama is not free for the drasha that Rabbi Akiva wanted to say, which turns it into an obligation. So now what does Rabbi Akiva do with that? Doesn't he have the drasha la yitama comes to include also that you can't become, comes to exclude, that you can't become impure to body parts? Rabbi Akiva, in kem lichto rachmana la velishtok. It's really from the word la, to her and not to her body parts, right? So now we're incomplete body. So now they say it could have just said la and been silent. It didn't need the word yitama. Yitama lama lishma mina. So from that extra word yitama, la yitama, to her you can become impure. It just could have said to her. We would have known what it meant. So, and then you would have darshan la comes to say her, but not her parts of her body. And yitama is totally unnecessary. Yitama must come to teach obligation. Rabbi Yishmael, what does he say? Now we'll read the pasuk better and see, could it really be read without the word yitama? In other words, it's kind of to round out the sentence. The pasuk says, right, the ulachotob chula krovai lav, his sister who's a virgin who's close to him, asher lo hayta leish, it's never been with a man, la yitama. Now, if it just said to her what? To her you can become impure. And obviously, you need that word in the sentence. So Akiva didn't think you needed that word. Rabbi Yishmael says you needed that word for the context. And again, as we saw, the Chidetani Rabbi Yishmael, the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, as he said, as we see in the braita that he said, it looks repetitive, it's not really repetitive, it's really adding something new. Next category. This is what we said, Avadim Knani, okay, Canaanite slaves. We're going to finally learn today about this Canaanite thing, why they're called Canaanite slaves. Because they're not necessarily Canaanite slaves. And by the way, isn't there this obligation to kill all the people of the 7 nations when we come into land? It's one of those difficult moral questions. How can we kill all these people? But putting that question aside, where there's obviously a lot to be said there, and maybe what we're saying is it's representing people with no morality. It's certainly the way the Torah viewed the people in the 7 nations. In any case, it says here, they're your slaves and they're your slaves forever. So again, we'll get back to this Canaanite thing in a minute. Rishut, derived Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says it's obligatory. Optional. Rabbi Akiva, Omer Chova, he says it's obligatory. My time of Rabbi Yishmael, what's his reason? Well, you might have thought it was forbidden to have Canaanite slaves because it says, don't keep any of them alive, kill them all. Therefore, I need to tell you, well, they can be your slaves. Now, Lemishre, this doesn't come to include, by the way, you can't just take all the people from the 7 nations and say, oh, be our slaves. That's not the case, because you really do have to kill them. Lemishre, what does this come to permit? Bahem tavodu, who are we talking about? It comes to permit someone from one of these nations, from a different nation, if someone, and we'll see in a minute where we learn this from, what they're claiming right now is the pasuk that says "La'olam behem tavodu," they could be your slaves forever, is coming to say that if a Canaanite woman sleeps with a man from a different nation and has a child, that child can be your slave. So that's why we end up calling them Canaanite slaves. And by the way, we say Canaanite here, we mean any of the 7 nations, but it really only means that their mother is from the 7 nations, not their father. So if the mother has a child with one of these men from a different nation, that you can actually allow to have them as your slaves. But that just means it's permitted. Right? Sorry, I skipped. Yeah, that's what I read just. That you're allowed to purchase them. Okay? And then they could be your slaves. Ditanya. Now we're going to have a braita that shows how we learn this. And then we're going to have a bit of a problem because we just said that we learn it from Olam Behem Tavodu. But this Rasha is actually going to learn it from a different pasuk. How do we know that if you have someone from one of these nations who comes and marries a Canaanite woman or has relations with her and gives birth to a child, that you can buy them as a slave? Talmud Lomal, as it says, different pasuk. That pasuk, by the way, was in Sefer. Olam Behem Tavodu is in Vayikra Kafeh. Verse 46, and now we're going to quote a pasuk from Vayikra Kafeh 45. Okay, the pasuk right before. V'gam mibnei atoshavim agarim imachem mehem tiknu. Also from the people that are living with you, buy from them. Right, the sons of the toshavim that are living with you. Yachol afa Knani. So then it sounds like you might have thought this would include even a Canaanite or one of the 7 nations. Talmud relationship with someone else. Talmud Lomar, but it says later on in that pasuk, Asher holidu ba'artzachem. They gave birth in your land. Now there's this assumption that the men go out and the men go find women from other places. And the men who come, the Canaanite women, who has relations with them, men who come from other places. So it says, Asher holidu ba'artzachem, they gave birth in your land. That means, Minan oladim ba'artzachem v'lo min hagarim ba'artzachem. So it says, even though it started with that are living among you, it's living among you who were born here. Why were they born here? Because some man came from abroad, had a relationship with the women who were living here, as opposed to the men who were here who went abroad to find other women. That's how they darshan it. Whether that's the simple reading is a whole separate question, but that's the drasha. Because again, it also has to be balanced with you can't keep them alive. So how do we balance it? We say, okay, the mother could be Canaanite, not the father. So now Rabbi Akiva, what's he going to say about that? Doesn't he also have that halacha? So again, what did Rabbi Yishmael say? Rabbi Yishmael said, Lo techayat kol neshama makes us think it's forbidden. Comes lo olam behem tavodu to say, no, you can keep them as your slaves as long as their mother is Canaanite and their father is not. And that is permitted. It's not to say it's obligatory for you to keep them forever. Right? I mean, the obligation would be that they have to be yours forever. You can't ever let them go. You can't ever free them. So Rabbi Akiva, mehem tiknu nafta. He says, don't bother me with that pasuk lo olam behem tavodu. That is not used to teach you. Where do you learn this whole halacha that Rabbi Yishmael just learned? From mehem tiknu. Buy from these people, the one living in your land. Meaning that their mothers are from here, but their fathers are from abroad. Lo olam behem tavodu is still free. Because that whole drasha that Rabbi Yishmael said to learn was learned in this braita from somewhere else. Lo olam behem tavodu is still free. So lama li l'chova. That's to say obligatory. Rabbi Yishmael, so what does Rabbi Yishmael do? It doesn't Right now, the Olam Behem Tavodu is free, really, because according to what he said, he proved a braita where it was learned from a different pasuk entirely. So, Lo Olam Behem Tavodu, and as again, it's not entirely, it was the pasuk right before it. But the point is, Lo Olam Behem Tavodu, what does he do with that? It really seems unnecessary now. Why doesn't he learn from here obligatory? Bahem V'lo Ba'achechem, it's to teach you the slaves that are going to be yours forever are Canaanite slaves, but not Eved Ivri. We know there's Jewish slaves, which have to leave after 6 years, and Canaanite slaves, which are yours forever. By the way, they don't have to be Canaanite. They can be from any of the 7 nations, their mother, and the father from somewhere else, or they could be entirely Gentiles, not from any of those nations. We just call them Canaanite slaves, probably from this sugya, because their mothers could be Canaanites. So now Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Yishmael say? Ahem and not achechem. So now that pasuk isn't free according to Rabbi Akiva either. Rabbi Akiva doesn't have this drasha b'hem v'lo b'achechem? No, he doesn't. Why not? Rabbi Akiva b'achechem yiseva dikra nafka, because at the end of that pasuk where it talked about you can keep these slaves forever and give them over to your sons, it then says u'b'achechem b'nei Yisrael yishbachi v'lo tirdebo b'parah. But your own brothers, don't treat them, don't work them so hard. Right? Reference, by the way, to Egypt, where they treated us b'farech. We had to work very hard labor. Don't do that to your brothers. Meaning, basically, all the rules about Canaanite slaves don't apply to Jewish slaves. So you don't need Bahem to teach you that. In Olam Bahem Ta'avodu, just them. And Bahem is free to teach you obligation. So now, this one's a little longer than all the others. So now they say, Rabbi Yishmael, what does he do with that? Well, I dichtav be'achechem tivnani Bahem. As we've seen already, as we've seen already, third time. That pasuk said, in the beginning of the pasuk, these people will be yours forever. These people, not your brothers. What about the fact that it says your brothers in the end of the pasuk? That's going to teach you, don't do severe hard labor. That's something else. If something's repeated, it's repeated. Teach you something new. Teach you something new. Hareth. This whole thing about hard work, don't work them so hard. That's different from keep them forever, right? Versus not keep them forever. The beginning, you learn don't keep Jewish slaves forever. At the end, you learn don't treat them too harshly. Okay, so that ends that whole section. So what we did in that section, okay, again, quick review. We started off with different approaches. Is kinui good or is it not good? From there, we saw this machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva about, and we got off a little bit on a tangent about learning about basic concepts of sinning from the Sotah. And then we went to this thing about 3 topics where Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva debate, is it reshut or is it chovah, is it optional or is it obligatory, and how each one darshan. Each time Rabbi Yishmael said, you would have thought it was forbidden, comes a pasuk to tell you it's permitted. Came Rabbi Akiva and said, it says things twice in 2 different ways. The second way is to tell you it's obligation. And then we had to do the ping pong back and forth, what they each do with the others verses. Now we have other things about we go back to talking about znut, and then we're going to go back to, I forgot in my review to talk about, we had that thing in the middle, about the Eid Echad. Why does the Torah believe one witness? And then we're going to go back to that issue of the one witness. And there we said, because there was raglayim ledavar, there was already evidence to the fact that she was doing something wrong, and therefore the Eid Echad was enough to just give us the support we needed to basically be pretty clear that she had done it. So from now to the end, we're going to have a whole bunch of things about sinning and how bad it is, and particularly znut and some other things, prostitution or inappropriate relations. And then we're going to get back to this issue of the Eid Echad, the one witness. Znuta bebeita kikarya l'shumshum. So znut in the house is like worms in sesame, which basically eats away. So does znut eat away at the house. Okay, it tears away the whole family structure. And anger in the house also is like worms eating through sesame. But Idi comes to the Gemara and says, by the way, this is just be'itata, just by the woman. Rashi explains what's the issue. The woman, I'll read it in Rashi, be'itata kishayisham nazna okasanit, when she has a relationship with someone else or is angry, then it causes problems in the house. Why? The woman has certain jobs she's supposed to do in the house. Remember from Ketubot? She's not going to be doing her jobs if she's busy sleeping around with other men. She doesn't take care of her house. She also throws away her husband's money. So basically, she's eating away at everything in the house by not dealing with it and maybe by eating through the money. Whereas, in a kind of complicated way to understand this, but if he does it, it's not as bad. It doesn't destroy the house. first of all, it doesn't mean it's not as bad the way I just said it. Maybe it just means it doesn't destroy the house because the husband's not in charge of the house. So it's not like he's neglecting the house anymore. The money issue is a bit of an issue. He might be working less, or he might be spending his money on his new mistress or whatever it is. So it's not like it doesn't destroy the house, and it obviously destroys the relationship between them. So I understand this is a bit of a question, a bit of a difficult sugya here. We're now going to quote a pasuk, which is actually a totally different context. It's saying Hashem is, I'll read you the whole pasuk. It's in Dvarim Kaf Gimel Tevav. It's about when you're Ki Hashem Elokecha mitalech b'kerev machanecha latzilcha latet oivecha lefanecha v'ayam machanecha kadosh v'lo yorech v'charav v'tavar v'shamech orech. The place where God is God is in the midst of your camp to save you and be there to protect you from your enemies, and your camp should be a holy place, sanctified, and God shouldn't see any ervat davar and leave you. So now they say the following: God used to be b'kerev machanecha, as it says in Sefer Dvarim, but what happened? That was before. B'tchila kodem shachatu Yisrael. That was before the Jews started sinning. But now, but now that the Shechina now that they sinned, the Shechina, God's presence, is not with us the way it used to be. And that's when you see the end of that pasuk, because when God does see Ervat Davar, he's going to leave us, and we've been involved, right? It seems to be here, if a number of people are involved in this caused God to leave entirely, even the people who aren't involved in this. And this is, again, statements that are trying to say how bad this kind of behavior is. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani amar Rabbi Yonatan. If you do one mitzvah, and here you show the importance of a mitzvah. Sorry about that. It basically goes with you into the world to come. As we quote a pasuk in Yishayahu, that your righteousness will go before you. Go before you where? To the future, in the world to come. Anyone who transgresses in this world, basically it covers you up, you're shrouded in it, and it goes with you to your day of judgment. I'll read through the Safari translation. The paths of their way wind, they go up in waste and are lost. Okay, so from here you see, this is actually the current translation. This will happen, right? They will encircle you and basically go with you forever. Rabbi Elazar Omer, you do a transgress, it will follow you like a dog. This with Yosef. He didn't listen to Isha Potiphar's wife, to sleep with her, to be with her. Why to sleep with her, to be with her? Why to? Not to sleep with her in this world. To be with her forever. She'll be forever wrapped around him, because his sin will go with him forever. So again, here you see how severe these punishments are. Okay, so before we finish up with the last part, again, quick review of our daf. These different approaches. Is it a sul? Is it mutar lekanot? And then even within mutar, is it obligatory or optional? And we got into all that with Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. In between that, we had some comments, and also after that, some comments about sinning. Is it ruach shtut comes into you? Some evil spirit comes, some bad spirit comes into you, or foolishness causes it. What caused the husband to do the kinui? Also, we had a whole discussion. Was it a good thing or a bad thing? Why did they believe this Eid Echad? And how does that work, the order of Tzukim? We had the three topics in which Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree about. Is it Reshut or Chovah? One being our topic, and then moving into selling avadim k'nanim. Are you allowed to, or do you have to keep them forever? And the issue of the brother Kohen being mitameh to his sister. Is it an obligation, or is it just that it's permitted? And then we got off on the importance of doing one mitzvah, the problems of one sin and how bad it could be. They seem to be referring to the sin of znut. If you take a really big one, that really is going to keep with you forever, as they quoted from Yosef. Now we're going to end with, and I won't review the daf again, that was our review. Now we're going to end with a Mishnah. It's Nanatam. They now quote a Mishnah from later in the Masechet. Shaya B'din. You might have thought logically, this whole thing, we're back to Eid Echad. Ma idut rishona, which later the Gemara there's a braita that's going to say what we mean by idut rishona is witnesses that she went into the room alone with him after the kinui. Since idut rishona ain oselta yisur olam, it doesn't forbid her forever to her husband. It all depends what happens when she drinks the Sotah waters. Only if she's guilty, but if she's not, she can go back to her husband. And yet you need two witnesses. So wouldn't logic state that edut achrona, then to witnesses to say that she actually was having relations with this man, shows sartai sorolam, then she'll be forbidden forever to her husband, and obviously also to the one she was sleeping with. What do you think you need minimum two? That's why you need the pasuk. Because logic might tell you that. Pasuk comes to say, no, that's not the case. Even one witness would have been enough to not drink the Sotah waters, as we saw yesterday. So then they suggest another kavachomer. Kavachomer leidut rishona me'ata. Well, maybe then let's learn backwards from here to the previous. So if the edut that she was impure, that she slept with him, can be only with one witness, edut rishona, wouldn't you think that going into the room alone with him, which won't forbid her forever, which is lighter, so maybe one witness is enough. Talmud Lomo, now they're going to quote it from somewhere where eventually they're going to say, no, that's not really where we get it from, but let's start with it. This I told we get back to. When you want to divorce, a man wants to divorce his wife, it says in the Torah, if you marry someone and then you find something, she slept with somebody else, now it says arat daval. What do we learn from daval? In a different pasuk, it says we need 2 or 3 witnesses to prove something. I'm not going to get into the 3 right now. It's a whole other drasha. But basically, you need 2 witnesses to prove anything. Therefore, we learn also by erva, if you want to prove that she was erva, then that she slept with someone, you would need 2 witnesses. So just like by there, it's 2 edim. Obviously, here with the stira, it has to be 2 edim. It's not exactly a good proof, which is what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? You don't learn it from matzah be'ervat davar that you need 2 witnesses for the stira. That's talking about divorce. It's not our topic there. Mi bat nafka. When it said in the pasuk, v'shachav ish otah. Okay, if a man slept with her, this is in the Sotah. Okay, we're in chapter 5 in Bamidbar, verse 13. And he didn't know, right? And she went into a room with him. That's our pasuk, right? Which taught us if there is one witness, it would work, right? Now, eid ein ba, what's the ba? It's coming to teach you that it wasn't a witness to show that she actually did something with it. Now, ba mi ba nafka, ba v'lo b'kinui, ba v'lo b'stira. That's to come to specifically ba, here. Many times they darshan the word bo or ba. It means specifically here. For this issue, yes, we'll accept one witness, but not for kinui and not for stira. And that actually is premised on the logic of before. We're only allowing one witness here because we have 2 witnesses all along for the other things. Mibaile. Okay, so basically they say this drasha makes no sense. It's not learned from kimatzah be'ervat davar. It's learned from ba. And it's not that the content doesn't make sense. It's just that the psukim they used are the wrong psukim. To which they say, Achinami kamar. Yeah, fix the Mishnah. That's really what it should say. It should be from ba, and it shouldn't be ba from kimatzah be'ervat davar. And then they say, right, Talmud lomar ba, ba v'lo b'kinoi, ba v'lo b'stira, and they basically say the Mishnah should be fixed to read this. To which the Gemara then says, v'tuma ba'alma. Now, what if you want to prove that your wife was cheating on you without kinoi and stira, but you have witnesses? So, tuma ba'alma, below kinoi, below stira, delo mehem aneda chamanalan. How do we know that you can't just have one witness come forward? That we have from kimatzah be'ervat davar. And now we go back to that exact drasha we quoted before. Ne'amar kan kimatzah be'ervat davar, v'ne'amar la'alana pishnayim edim, al pishlosha edim, yakum davar. The word davar appears in both. This is what we call gzera shava. There it talked about 2 witnesses. Therefore, also when it comes to erva, you have to have 2 witnesses. Right? There are some things in the Torah that we use 1 witness for. Now, in general, testimony less so. But if someone says they eat kosher, you can believe them. If they can be a kosher witness, then you can believe them when they say my house is kosher and you can eat in their house. That's edachad ne'aman b'isurim. But when it comes to erva, no. Ma davar ha'amor lahalan edim shnayim, av kan edim shnayim. So just like edim there is 2, likewise edim here is 2. And we're going to end with this braita tanu Rabbanan, the beginning of this braita anyway. Ezoi edut rishona, zoi edut stira, edut achrona, zoi edut tuma. Just to define the terms of the Mishnah, even though we knew based on this, which is when it said edut rishona, it meant the stira part. When she goes into the room alone, we need 2 witnesses. When it said the edut achrona, which 1 witness is enough, that's the tuma. That's her actually, that someone witnessed them having relations. So now we have this, we kind of raised questions. Why echad here and not there? And could we learn one from the other? in both directions, there needs two, just like this needs two, or the other one needs one, just like this only needs one. And in the end, we basically proved from psukim, no. We had a little bit of a fixing of which psukim proved what, but in the end, we concluded what all the psukim are for and why you need two witnesses for the stira, and why you also need two witnesses if it's not a Sotah case, just a regular case where she was alone with a man, and you want to prove that she committed adultery, you need two witnesses to prove it. Okay, that's it for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.